You're listening to Prosperity Report, Love and Money Podcast, the relationship podcast that helps you feel more confident financially and romantically. We do this by giving you actionable ideas to help you stop comparing and start repairing your mindset, your money, your relationship, and your life. I'm your host, Kanae Corder, best-selling author, international speaker, hypnotherapist, and financial therapist. Let's grow with the flow together. Enjoy the show. Before we get into today's show, I'd like to ask you a question. Do you want to feel more confident personally and financially? Then take my free masterclass, A Wealth of Confidence. You'll learn to reduce stress and increase wealth with confidence. You'll get a great understanding of your idea of prosperity. You'll learn your money mentality or your money personality. And that way you can reduce the stress in your life. You can increase the wealth in your life because you're going to get actionable tools and resources that you can start using immediately to transform your life. So take my free masterclass, A Wealth of Confidence. Go to KanaeCorder.com/wealth. That's KanaeCorder.com/wealth and get a wealth of confidence. Reduce stress and increase wealth in your life so you can reach your idea of prosperity. So now let's get into today's show. As we continue Financial Awareness Month, I want to talk to my millennials. If you are a millennial, keep listening. This episode is for you. I love working with millennials because I have 2 millennial daughters and a millennial son-in-law, and I'm always giving them advice on love and money. But it's great to have somebody else talk about some of the same things I talk about, and I can share this episode with them. So I'm really excited about this. I'm talking to Conor Richardson. And Conor is a CPA, a personal finance expert, and the author of Millennial Money Makeover. He brings a simplicity to talking about money. So if you're ready to make over your money or you're just getting started and you want to get on the right foot, this is a great episode. We're going to talk about eliminating student loan debt. We're going to talk about the different savings accounts you need to have and just how to live a rich life. And listen all the way to the end for a 5-minute activation. And if you like what you hear, go to KanaeCorder.com/Conor for just a little special something. I'll put that in the show notes. Let me introduce you to our guest. Please join me in welcoming our guest today, Conor Richardson. Hey, Conor, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
I am so glad to talk to you because I love when conversations are specifically about millennials. Mainly because I'm a Gen Xer and my daughter is a millennial. So nothing brings me more joy than to send her a podcast episode that was specifically about her.
That's so kind of you.
Yeah, tell her that. So the first question I ask every guest, and I'd love to hear your idea of prosperity. What is your idea of prosperity?
Right. Well, that's a great first question. So I think prosperity for me means really being able to spend time doing the things that I love in life. And I think money is it provides texture to your life story. So it's something that we all have to deal with, but it's definitely not the essence and meaning of life. So prosperity is spending time with my wife and my children and not having to think about money all the time.
Yeah. Oh, I love how you said texture of life. Like that is such a rich word. No pun intended.
Right.
So I know that you, in your, tagline, you say that you help people live a rich life. How does that go along with their idea of prosperity?
Well, I think the two definitely marry, and they certainly do for me. So in my book, Millennial Money Makeover, I take readers through a 6-step process and sequence that they can follow that really distances themselves from the paycheck to paycheck lifestyle and they can actually open up their life to many more options that they didn't see beforehand because they were, sort of harnessed down and had to focus on money all the time. Well, the rich life is just getting to a place where, again, it marries with that term of prosperity I talked a little bit earlier, is you don't think about money. And so you can focus on your passions, your interests, helping other people. That's the essence of a good life and a rich life.
Yeah, I'm so with you. And I so love your language. I like how you said distance themselves from that paycheck to paycheck lifestyle. That is a really good visual to just find yourself getting further and further away from that stress. I'm a hypnotherapist. I don't know if you know that. So I work a lot with visualization, and to actually have somebody visualize themselves distancing themselves from debt, distancing themselves from money stress. That is a beautiful scene. So I like your language.
Well, thank you. Yeah, over 50% of millennials are financially unhappy, and that brings and induces stress in your life. And so anything that you can do to reduce that anxiety is tremendous for, long-term health, mental as well as physical.
Yeah, I'm so with you. I talk a lot about being financially confident, and confidence and happiness kind of go together. If you are not confident, then chances are you're not going to be happy either. And so when that money comes in and you don't even know where it's supposed to go, or it has to go somewhere before you can even get it all the way in the door, that's really stressful. And that brings down your financial confidence. So I get what you're saying. And I didn't know that the numbers were that high, the 50% of millennials were financially unhappy. So I'm going to ask you about that specific term. So your book is called Millennial Money Makeover.
That's right.
How is a millennial money makeover different than any other makeover? And I'm assuming this 50% of millennials being unhappy is part of it. Tell me more about that.
Absolutely. So that's the whole point. So a lot of the processes and systems for good money management and to build long-term wealth are standard in a sense. But the way that this book is different is that, it's written by a millennial for millennials. So the millennial challenges are much different from previous generations. So we have an astronomical amount of student loan debt. And the reason for that is higher education has been increasing at a cost at around 6% higher than inflation over the last decade. So we have this skyrocketing debt. And at the same time, our generation is earning 20% less than our parents' generation. So you have debt going up and purchasing power going down. And so millennials are feeling this squeeze as a result of that. And I try to take them through the sequence of dealing with it in a very stepwise approach to where they can really confront the issue in the room, which is their debt. And then once they get that taken care of, how do they then start to build that emergency fund, the slush fund, and then begin investing and creating that wealth for themselves?
Absolutely. So, two questions that you just sparked for me. I hear millennials talk about this emergency fund, but then this slush fund too. And I'm a Gen Xer again, that we didn't much talk about that when I first got into this business. Tell me about the difference between those two.
Right. So the emergency fund is the little pool of money that you set aside for yourself to take care of emergencies. So the car breaks down, you get sick, maybe your dog gets sick, you have an unexpected bill that you need to pay for. It's named for a reason. So it's a true emergency. And historically, personal finance experts have put this around $1,000. But the problem is that they haven't updated that number in about 20 to 30 years. So I recommend trying to save around $3,000 for your emergency fund. And another reason that I update that number is because millennials are living in dense metropolitan areas where typically the cost of living is actually much higher than in other areas of the country. And then so once you create that emergency fund, again, you're distancing yourself from a financial collapse. And then you start to build up what I call a slush fund. So that's 3 to 6 months of your living expenses, and you save this in cash. And the reason you want to get to 3 to 6 months is that it typically takes about 90 days to find new employment, whether that's, you're involuntarily go somewhere or you voluntarily leave. It typically takes about 90 days to find new employment. So the 3 to 6 months lets you take advantage of opportunities as they come across your desk.
Okay, great. I love the idea of the slush fund and the emergency fund being different. It's something that I did when I was a financial advisor with Morgan Stanley. We named it differently, but I do think that having your emergency fund separate from that, like if I lose my job, slush fund that you are putting together, I think that's really important because losing your job or changing jobs isn't an emergency exactly. Like if you are moving to another job, and there's going to be some time in between. That isn't an emergency exactly. Now, losing your job can feel like an emergency, but by essence of what we're calling it, it is that, oh my gosh, the water heater broke or whatever, the furnace broke. And
Exactly.
the furnace costs at least $3,000. Like, so I'm glad you made a point to raise that number up because I've noticed that too, that numbers aren't changing. And if the number isn't changing, if you're still saying $1,000 isn't what it used to be. Emergencies cost a lot more than that, especially if this millennial has a Range Rover. But
Very true. And to that point, I actually advocate housing your emergency fund and your slush fund in two different accounts. So I think you should have your emergency fund in a savings account with your regular checking account so that you can see that cushion for yourself and you can dip into it when necessary. But your slush fund, you should maybe put at a different institution and earn some interest on it. But if it's out of sight, it's out of mind. And you really only need to dip into it when that unemployment arises. So it's important to have that visual difference so that you don't find yourself, taking a cookie out of the cookie jar.
yes, I totally get it. And I like that. You talk a lot like me, and you're very visual. I see a lot of things that you do are visual, which is great because that's usually how people learn. In school, we sat in lecture halls, but nobody really learns like that. Most people are visual. I mean, some people are auditory, don't get me wrong. Sorry, guys, if you are, but most people are visual learners, or they either have to do it, like they've got to be practically doing it and then they get it. But visuals help a lot. So I love the way that you present the material because it is a lot easier to digest when it's not a bunch of jargon and just like way up in the air.
Thank you. Yes, and the financial industry has done a terrific job of making the terms and vocabulary incredibly complex. But
Yep.
when you can break something down and distill it to its essence, it should be simple. This is all very simple once you get down to the essence of what we're talking about. And once people can visualize and you put their numbers into practical terms, it takes away that anxiety of, okay, I can do this. This is not as bad as this 10-page document is making it out to be.
Right. I'm with you. And I've said that for years. It's like it doesn't have to be this complicated. Let's simplify it. I mean, from all of it, from stocks, from bonds to personal finance, none of it has to be that complicated. But of course, industries like to sound smart, especially the financial industry. So, in order to separate them, and especially because before millennials, Gen Xers and baby boomers weren't doing a lot of this stuff themselves. Millennials have become a lot more do it yourself when it comes to their finances, especially including their investment. So I think the way that you're approaching it, having that language easy to understand, and not everybody is a numbers person. And that's one of the things that I hear a lot. Well, I want to have a better relationship with my money, but I'm not a numbers person.
Right. Well, the good news is that you really only need an elementary to middle school level math skills to have superb financial success.
Mhm.
So you can make things incredibly complex, and there's derivatives and all these things that you can get in way above your head very quickly. But to build wealth, you really don't need a lot of complexity in your life. And that's a fallacy that a lot of people have fallen into. And I think that they put it up in front of themselves to create that barrier when they're scared of, crossing that other side.
Yeah, that's such a great point. So remember I said you make me think of two questions. So I want to go back to that other question.
Sure.
And you talked a little bit about student loan debt. And I know that one of your specialties is eliminating student loan debt. Can you talk more about that?
Sure. So the average college graduate has around $37,000 in student loan debt if you graduated in 2017. And those numbers fluctuate a little bit each year, but the reality is that that's an exceptional amount of debt. And I always say that an exceptional amount of debt requires an exceptional response. And one of the things that I talk about in Millennial Money Makeover is this concept of paying back your student loans the smart way. There's a couple different steps in there that I can run through pretty quickly.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. So the first one is making sure that you're listing your student loan debt in the smallest balance first, so in ascending order. And you really want to focus in on that smallest balance first, regardless of interest rate. Researchers at Northwestern University have determined that if you pay your smallest balance first, you're much more likely to pay off your entire balance later. So we really want to harness that data.
With you on that,
Good.
totally.
Yeah, the second is making sure you're paying the minimums and then trying to pay a little bit more on top of that. And the third is if you find more money, you're throwing it at your student loans. So whether that's picking up, a side hustle, as millennials like to call it, a part-time job, or you have a windfall, or you get that bonus to put it towards paying down your student loans. And then the fourth step is to make sure that you reward yourself in this process. So sometimes paying off, $30,000 or more than that can be a multi-year process. So it's important to give yourself small wins along the way. And when my wife and I were doing this, we love champagne. So we would buy a bottle of champagne every time we paid one of these things off to celebrate. And then the last step is making sure you put pen to paper and draw out a visual of the timeline it's going to take you. And this varies from person to person, depending on how aggressive you want to be with it, or maybe if you want a little bit more of a flexible lifestyle. But it's important to make sure you write down when you're actually going to pay it off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. And even being more visual, like we've been talking about, kind of the theme of the show, but having that visual too, even if you're just writing on pen and paper, but even making a big old board, if you have it hanging up somewhere to see yourself and motivate yourself to keep going, because those rewards will help you keep going, but that vision will help you keep going too, because as you see that debt slowly going away, it's like, oh yeah, now you get even more motivated, almost hitting like a critical mass where you do want to throw everything at it. So instead of getting that tax refund and going out and buying something with it, you want to put it towards your loan to see that number just go down even more.
You're exactly right. And I tell people to put this date on anywhere that's prominent in your house. So that could be your mirror in your bathroom, on your refrigerator, someplace that you see every day. And just, it can be in the peripheral vision, but it's out of the corner of your eye. And it's always present until you cross from what I call from red into black, where you're debt free.
Mm-hmm. So cool. Now, when I send my daughter this podcast episode, she's going to swear that you're planted. Like, you just told him to say all the things. You've been saying this for years.
You have a third party now to verify what mom's been saying.
Yeah, it's true. It's like, you can tell your children stuff all the time, but when you give them a third party that's saying those things that you've been saying, it's almost like they finally heard it, or they could hear it. Like maybe she'll hear you somewhere else and she'll say, oh, Mom, I've heard this guy and he was talking about this. And I'm like, wait, I've been saying that for years. What are you talking about?
Yeah. And you know what? That brings up a great point. So the first chapter in Millennial Money Makeover is what I call making a rich decision to turn professional with your finances. So nothing in life starts unless you make a decision for change. And the whole first chapter is about building up that confidence that we talked about, creating short-term and long-term goals. But ultimately, it's always up to the individual to make the decision to change their relationship with money that will alter their trajectory and put them on a collision with success.
Look at you. Your words are just beautiful. You're going to run into success. You don't even have to go looking for it. She's just going to run into it. It's so awesome. I like that. So I do have a question still about debt, because so the focus is paying off student loan debt, but what if at the same time you've kind of accumulated some credit card debt? What are we doing with that?
Right. Well, if you've accumulated some credit card debt, the good news is you're not alone. So a lot of people have credit card debt. And the second chapter in the book, which is Crossing from Red to Black, actually starts with credit card debt. So if you have credit card debt and student loans, I advocate that you pay off credit card debt first. And really, the main reason for that is because traditionally and hopefully, those credit card balances are much smaller than your student loan balances.
Mm-hmm.
So we're still harnessing that power of psychology that we talked about earlier.
Interest rates are usually
Higher.
higher
Yep.
than student loan interest rates.
That's right. You get the combo of both lower balances, higher interest rate, get those out of your life. And that really, once you can start to eradicate those from your debt portfolio, people tend to get really excited very quickly. And then they can carry that momentum into those larger balances, which is terrific to watch.
That really is. So I work a lot on mindset. I mentioned I'm a hypnotherapist, and mindset is a big part of feeling financially confident because society has told us this is what we need to do in order to live a rich life. How are you combating what society, because you do realize that society is telling people different things. They're not saying pay off debt. Society is saying go in debt. It's saying buy more. If you really want to be successful, you need to buy a big house. So how do you help people combat that idea that society is right when they're not?
So I call this the filtered life, what you're talking about. So, social media, there's filters for every single picture that you put out there to make things look better. But this marketed idea of what life should be is putting people's best foot forward all the time. And it's extending themselves well beyond where they should be. So you're right. We're inundated with messages like, buy this new shirt or buy that new iPhone. It's always this next thing. And so people equate these very expensive items with wealth. But actually, it's the complete opposite. Because if you're not purchasing those incredibly expensive assets or just clothes, you're saving it. So the ultra wealthy, and they've done studies on this, where the average millennial is not spending more than a couple $100s on shoes or a watch. So these items of extreme luxury, which are flaunted as everyday objects, are not. It's all a facade. So if you want to accumulate, the fastest way to do that is typically to stem your spending because you have a lot of control over the variable costs in your life. So you're right. We're marketed this idea that is exactly the opposite of what you should be doing.
Yeah, which takes us away from the real rich life because then we are stressed because we're trying to make payments and keep up with the Joneses. And life is not rich, like you said, in your idea of prosperity, if you have to work hard to get this money and if you're always stressed and you don't have the time to spend with your family or friends or to do those things you really love.
Right. And one of the things I say is you look downtown at any major skyline, the name of credit card companies is usually in one of the tallest buildings down there. So they make a living off of human fallibility to overconsume, to underpay.
Yeah. Now, I am not opposed to a certain amount of debt. So I should say that because people are going to say, well, Kanae, you've said that some debt is okay. And I do believe if you can get it cheap, use other people's money. But I don't come from a personal finance background. I come from an investment background. And so we do look at both sides of the balance sheet. And if you can get money for cheap, then it does help you to use other people's money. It's when the money is expensive is when you don't want it or you want to pay it off as quickly as possible. But 0% financing is joyous to me.
Yeah, especially when you are, trying to look at buying a house for the first time or you're thinking about getting a mortgage. You obviously want to go with the lower interest rate on those. But I tend to tell people to stay out of debt, especially once they cross from red into black, because of the habit formation of using debt. I mean, it's there for a reason and it can be great, but most of the time people have a difficulty with paying it off and staying out of debt. So my recommendation, and especially in this book, is once you get debt free, stay there.
Yeah, and it sounds like what you're saying, the way that I explain that to patients or clients is usually know yourself. So many wealthy clients who use debt, but they pay it or use credit cards, but they pay them off every single month. And they are doing that well, and they've been doing that for years. However, if that is not your strength, if you know that you're going to pay the minimum and then end up maxing the card out, you've done this before, you're probably not going to do it differently because our brains repeat the same patterns. Then create a new habit by not using the credit card at all if it's not your strength to pay in full, because you do have to know yourself. So that's a great point that you bring up. Know yourself. And if you got into this trouble before, it's likely that that might still be in you if you haven't gone through financial therapy or hypnotherapy, of course. But
Very
that
true.
might, right. That habit is probably still in you. So if you go back to it, you're going to get yourself in that same trouble.
Right. Yep. You're just suppressing that habit.
Yeah. Awesome. So we're almost going to wrap up. I have two more questions for you. One is another question that I ask every guest, and it depends on their expertise. So this question is around money. What is the best advice you've ever received financially, or the advice you wish somebody would have told you? So the best money advice you've ever received, or the advice you wish somebody would have told you.
The best advice I've ever received is to never open a credit card.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So I actually did,
Oh,
and until I didn't.
okay. Okay.
Okay. So I was debt free, and had always used a debit card. And then I didn't have any credit. So actually, when I went to go apply to open up my first credit card, no one would actually give me one because I didn't have any history, because I was a little bit later in life. And, we're talking about those habit formations. I used it and just spent a little bit of money on it and paid it off immediately just to build up a little bit of credit. But I think it's one of those things that people get themselves in trouble with very early in life, especially if you're in college or you're just starting out in life and you want those things. Pay for things in cash, and you can save yourself a lot of heartache, a lot of late nights, and a lot of late fees if you can just use cash.
Awesome. Yep. So good. So I want you to tell people where they can find you. And then I have one last question for you.
Okay. So people can find me at millennialmoneymakeover.com. They can also find the book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever books are sold is our tagline. So if you enjoy what you read, I would love to get an email from you. I love hearing from readers, and it's been terrific to hear everyone's response so far, and it's been tremendous.
Awesome. So the last question is around, when do people know that they have mastered their money? So paying off debt is one part of it. There are probably parts of it, but how do you know when you've mastered your money?
When you get to the point where you are starting to live, and you can feel that rich life that we talked about from the very beginning. So you've distanced yourself away from this debt culture. You're starting to accumulate savings. You have an emergency fund, and you're not really thinking about money. You have your financial ecosystem set on autopilot, which you learn about in chapter 6 of the book. Once you get to that point and you haven't thought about it in months, you're there.
Nice. All right. Well, thank you so much, Connor. This was it was such a treat because we speak the same language. And even though I kind of like to disagree with my guest a little bit just to make it fun,
Uh-huh.
I really did like it that we were in line.
Oh, good. Yep. Well, I appreciate it very much.
Thank you. So stay tuned, guys, for our 5-minute activation, and we will talk with you later. It's time for 5-minute activation, a quick financial therapy session to get you activated and on your way to increasing the love and money in your marriage. So can I get 5 minutes of your time? Just 5 minutes for a financial therapy activation. On today's 5-minute activation, we're going to talk about passion and purpose. Do you know your purpose? Are you looking for it? Many people are. You're not alone. There's so many people looking for their purpose who just don't know. Maybe they feel like their purpose has eluded them, or maybe they feel like they'll never find their purpose. They see other people so passionate about things and they can't figure out, why don't I have that passion? Well, you do. You're passionate about something. So I'm going to encourage you to look at your passion rather than your purpose. Now, here's the difference. Your passion is that thing that lights you up, the thing that gives you butterflies, the thing that the sun can't come up fast enough for you to get back to it. You may be passionate about healthcare. You could be passionate about children. You could be passionate about the brain, like me. You could be passionate about wealth and helping people find it. You could be passionate about different things. What is your passion? What is it that warms your heart? What is it that you could wake up early for and go to sleep late for? What is it that every time you see somebody doing it, you want to be a part of it? What is that subject? Maybe you're so curious about it that you want to read everything about it, listen to every podcast, watch every news or television show about it, documentaries, you name it. Could be music, could be meditation. Whatever it is, you have it. Think about it. What is that thing? Now, don't get afraid, because a lot of times people say, well, I don't know how I would make money with my passion. That's not important here. All we're doing is identifying your passion. Now, just for a second, get that thought in your head. Got it? Good. Now, your passion can move you towards your purpose. And the way you find your purpose is to take that passion that lights you up and see how you can solve a problem so that you can help light somebody else up or serve someone else. So what is it that you're passionate about that you could shift to a problem-solving purpose? So I'll give you an example. I am passionate about two things, wealth and wellness. And the problem that I solve so that I can live out my purpose is to help people reach their wealth goals without sacrificing their wellness or their relationships, because that's really important to me too. I'm very passionate about the love in our lives and the connection we have. I'm very passionate about living a healthy life. And I'm very passionate about wealth because there's plenty, there's an abundance, there's prosperity in the world, and we can tap into that. We can have what we want. So what are you passionate about? Think about what lights you up. And then take that and see how you can use it to solve a problem in the world, because that is your purpose. Does this 5-minute activation make it just a little bit easier for you to find your purpose? Let's recap. If you discover your passion, you can get to your purpose. So think about that thing that really warms your heart, that really gives you butterflies in your stomach, and that you just can't stop thinking about. That's your passion. What I'm saying is, you can feel your passion in your gut, in your heart, and in your head. You feel your passion, you know your passion, and you think about your passion over and over and over again. That's how you know it's your passion. And let that lead you to your purpose by using your passion to solve a problem in the world, to help someone else light up, to warm someone else's heart. Just think, you'll become a part of their life story by just following your passion. Find your passion and you'll find your purpose. And that's our 5-minute activation for today. Hey guys, thanks for listening. If you want more love and money conversations, subscribe to this podcast. Also, tell your friends about us. I'll see you next episode. But in the meantime, head on over to connectquarter.com for more tips, tools, and resources. And go ahead and leave us a comment if you like. We'd love to hear from you. This show is not to replace professional counsel, the best advice comes from a professional you know. The topics discussed in this podcast are general in nature and are for entertainment and informational purposes only. We encourage you to meet with a professional to discuss your specific situation, whether financial or therapeutic. That's all for now. I'll see you sooner. Remember, no matter what anybody ever tells you, you can have wealth in all of its forms. Believe it, and you will soon see it.